Order, order. Caroline Vaughan to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, I can't see your name. I'm not Mr. Murison. I can't read with my glasses on. Dr. Murison. I grew up in Edinburgh. I went to Sheffield University and then I moved to London for work, where I lived on and off for nearly 20 years before moving to South Devon in 2007. I didn't understand rural life before then because it was something I had never experienced because I hadn't lived it. But over the last 18 years, I've come to realise that the rural-urban divide is one of the deepest divides in our country. I've learned a lot since about the difference between how a rural economy works and how differently things function in urban spaces. And I believe it's vital that we have people at the top making decisions who really understand rural communities. It would be great to have someone from the rural southwest at the top table, speaking up for a part of the country that is so often forgotten when spending decisions are made. I'm not going to talk about farming today, even though we have the DEFRA Minister in the room. We're all aware of the immense pressure that farmers are under, but I'm going to focus instead on the wider issues of rural life which affect everyone, from cradle to grave. If the government wants our economy to grow, it must remember that nearly a fifth of the population of the UK lives in rural areas, those where settlements have fewer than 10,000 residents. Let's look at what defines them. 10 million people in the UK live in rural areas. The more rural the area, the older the average age, and the faster this average age is now rising. 30% of the population of my constituency of South Devon is 65 or older. That's against 17% in urban areas. Work-based incomes are lower in rural areas. Net inward migration in the UK to rural areas is higher and is growing, except for those aged 17 to 20 who are leaving in search of education and training opportunities. People in rural areas travel almost twice as far as those in urban areas, but for those who don't own a car, travelling anywhere can be almost impossible. In many places, bus services don't exist and taxis are prohibitively expensive. It can cost £150 for some of my residents to do a round trip to the nearest hospital. Access to healthcare is a challenge as community services are cut. Hospitals can be a long way away and hospital transport is disappearing. In my constituency, there isn't a single dentist now taking on new NHS patients, and support for new parents in rural locations is thin on the ground. The proportion of rural premises with access to gigabit-capable broadband was 47% last year, compared to 84% in urban areas. Yet connection to high-speed internet, if anything, is more crucial when services are so scarce. Post offices are closing due to low usage, yet they provide an essential service, particularly to older people who don't drive and who need postage and banking services. I will give way.
Can I commend Honourable Lydia? Just right to mention about buses. I think of London. If you miss a tube, there's no one along in 2 minutes. If you miss a bus in Portavogie, you might have to wait an hour, half day to get another one. But in relation to banks, 11 banks have closed in my constituency of Strangford. Does the Honourable Lydia agree that if the alternative of a banking hub is okay, but it takes absolutely yonks and years for it to actually happen? Does the Honourable Lady say if a bank closes, there should be an obligation on banks to open a banking hub in conjunction with other banks?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I would agree. And we have 2 banking hubs in my constituency which are doing a really good job and providing a valued service. In fact, you've just come to my next point, which is banks are closing. We'll skip that. Pubs in villages are closing, often the only third space left where people can meet, socialise and build community. Opportunities for young people are limited, worsened by the lack of rural transport. I would happily give way.
I'm very grateful to you for that. I just wondered whether the honourable member agrees with me that many children in rural areas like mine of Mid Dorset and North Poole rely on the school bus. And when the previous government increased the age of participation from 16 to 18, they failed to also increase the age at which children who live in rural communities got free transport to school, creating costs of up to £1,000 per family per child to get their child to school every year. Would the honourable member agree with me that that needs to be resolved?
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and my colleagues are doing very well at predicting what I am about to say, because the next paragraph says, I hadn't shared my speech. I heard from 2 pupils this morning about how they miss out on all the after-school clubs and activities because they have to be on the school bus and can't get home later in the day. This directly impacts kids from more disadvantaged backgrounds and embeds that disadvantage even further, and it's something we must resolve. And housing. We all know that there is an affordability crisis in housing, but it is massively exacerbated in areas with a high number of second homes and flats and houses used as short-term lets rather than residential. Higher than average house prices coupled with lower than average wages is a toxic combination.
On that point, I do think the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making an excellent speech. One of the real big problems we have in my very remote constituency is the cost of delivery charges and surcharges. They're a lot higher than you would pay in a city like Glasgow or Edinburgh. And it's the same for the Highlands as it is for rural parts of England. Whereas, so does the Honourable Member agree with me that it would be good if the government could look at this and try and take it down to a level playing field so people are not disadvantaged because of where they live?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I absolutely agree, and we are coming on to the delivery of services and the cost later on. Higher than average house prices coupled with lower than average wages is a toxic combination. The median full-time salary in South Devon is significantly below the national average, but the average house price at £337,185 is significantly above the national average. New-built homes regularly go on the market for around £1 million. This means the house price to full-time salary ratio in Devon is 10.6, well above the England average of 8.7, and Devon as a whole has the highest ratio in the South West. But on top of all this, we must also look at the issue of deprivation. Deprivation in rural areas tends to be dispersed, which means it is much less well identified, yet South West England is one of the rural areas where deprivation is more prevalent. In small communities, just one or two very wealthy residents can skew the figures for the whole settlement, meaning pockets of deprivation can be even more hidden. The index of multiple deprivation, used to capture need for core local authority services, is a relative measure of deprivation based on data from 2019. The index is urban-centric and it misses small dispersed rural pockets of acute deprivation. It is simply not specific enough to capture need, especially social care. In Devon, most subdomains are less deprived than the national average. However, Devon is considerably more deprived compared to the national profile when you look at housing quality and barriers to housing and services. 47% of the total Devon population fall into the most deprived fifth nationally for the indoor environment measure. In rural areas, 1 in 4 households do not have a mains gas supply and hence are more likely to be reliant on oil or solid fuels for domestic heating. Less efficient, more expensive. In 2022, the average fuel poverty in rural villages, hamlets and isolated dwellings was nearly 3 times as high as the average for England as a whole. And 25% of the Devon population were also in the most deprived fifth nationally for the housing services sector, which measures distance from services such as GPs, food shops, post offices and primary schools, and measures of housing, overcrowding, affordability and homelessness. It's not all thatched cottages that you would see on the front of chocolate boxes. The Liberal Democrats are concerned that using deprivation as an indicator of demand for services does not consider local authorities with a higher number of elderly or vulnerable residents and the additional demands these residents place on our services. Under the previous government, DEFRA and the then Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities commissioned a piece of work to investigate rural deprivation as part of an update to the English indices of deprivation. It was anticipated to complete this year, so I would like to ask the Minister for an update on when this work will be completed and published.
Will the Honourable Lady give way?
Happily, yes.
I'm grateful. She's making an excellent speech about the challenges that her constituents in South Devon are making. Many of those challenges are very similar to my own constituency in the Scottish borders, but does she agree with me that all decision makers, whether it's in government, Scottish Government or local authorities or banks for that matter, need to do much more at rural proofing their policy making process, so that before they announce these policies need to understand much more clearly how they're going to impact on her constituents and my own in the borders?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and that comes back to what I'm saying about having people at the top table who really understand how these economies work, because so often these smaller communities are lost under the larger voice of the big cities. In peripheral rural and coastal communities, which have higher levels of high occupational risk groups, e.g. farming and vets, social isolation and loneliness is a cause for concern, with higher levels of suicide and self-harm admissions and lower levels of referral to psychological therapies. Rural isolation is particularly acute for older people who don't drive, with every pub, cafe or post office that closes, the opportunity to socialise with others or even just have a conversation disappears. But it is also damaging for younger people. Rural living means fewer opportunities for leisure, sport, socialising and part-time work. embedding disadvantage and a lack of opportunity to gain vital employment skills. This all sets the scene about the challenges of living in and providing services to rural areas, and I'm sure colleagues will elaborate on many of them, such as buses, banks and broadband. But I'd like to finish by looking at funding, because this has a real-world impact on rural communities like mine, and the figures are, quite frankly, shocking. Under the 2025-26 Local Government Finance Settlement, government-funded spending power in predominantly urban areas will be £573 per head compared to £407 in predominantly rural areas. Urban councils will get a huge 41% more per head than rural. Over 10,000 people, that equates to £1.66 million a year. Council tax per head will, on average, be 20% higher in rural areas than in urban areas. And now, predominantly urban areas are to receive over 7 times more of the proposed £600 million recovery grant than predominantly rural areas. Last week, the government announced continued funding for the Rural England Prosperity Fund, with up to £33 million directed to the fund to improve local infrastructure and essential services that benefit rural communities and help businesses to expand, creating jobs and kick-starting the rural economy. From 2023 to 25, this fund was £110 million. So while £33 million is welcome, it does equate to a cut of 36% in annual funding. We welcome DEFRA's announcement of up to £5 million to go towards the continuation of important services for rural communities, such as capital funding for the refurbishment and development of much-needed community-owned assets, such as village halls and community centres. And I've seen several of these in my own patch who've upgraded their community centres and are doing really vital work bringing the community together. But the Liberal Democrats are concerned by the government's decision to allocate additional funding within the local government finance settlement on a need and demand basis. The new system of allocation will not recognise that the sparse and isolated nature of rural areas drives higher costs for the delivery of essential services, creates challenges in recruitment of staff for key services, and requires local authorities to provide a greater public subsidy for the provision of public transport. And we know that the challenges of recruitment are having a direct impact on inward investment into rural areas, because companies who want to invest in South Devon are anxious to do so because they know that workers cannot afford houses in South Devon, so where's the workforce going to come from? Likewise, the government's suggestion that funding previously allocated to rural local authorities under the Rural Services Delivery Grant will be repurposed under the need and demand basis that jeopardises rural local authority funding. This is despite the grant providing rural local authorities with £100 million for the rollout of essential public services, including emergency services and the provision of social care in 24-25. So we urge the government to provide rural councils with a funding settlement which reflects the impact of rurality and sparsity of the areas they serve through the application of the fair funding formula. There's a lot to unpack here, but I have called this debate to urge the government to think about working more across Whitehall departments, to bring people together, to really consider the impact of departmental spending decisions, not only on that department, but the impact they have on each other. How do transport decisions affect education and with it the wider skills agenda? How do the health decisions that are made impact the economy in a rural area? How does the closure of hospitality businesses affect rural isolation, loneliness and mental health outcomes? I could go on, but I'm going to leave it to colleagues to give examples from their constituencies to highlight many of these issues. Thank you.
Can I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate? Members will have observed that this is oversubscribed, long list of people who want to contribute. Therefore, I urge discipline and an indicative limit of 2 minutes. If you're not here at the start of the debate, you won't be called, and I'll start wind-ups from the front bench at 5:08. Lee Pitcher.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Dr Morrison, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for South Devon for securing this debate. Representing a rural area and having spent a lot of my career working with rural communities and the land, I'm keenly aware of the challenges that our communities in my constituency face. When services fail, it's our rural communities that are hit first and are hit the hardest. Because of their size, small rural schools and doctor surgeries are already working with smaller margins than their urban cousins. So when budgets have been cut, those cuts have gone straight to the bone. Rural broadband and phone services lag behind, making it more challenging to set up businesses to work from those particular areas. And I've seen areas where rural bus services that have been reduced to almost nothing when they haven't disappeared completely, cutting off communities and massively affecting the lives of elderly and disabled people. The big bus companies have pulled out of many of our rural areas, but I know that these routes can actually work. Hornsby Buses, a local family company in the Isle of Axholme, are doing amazing work finding ways to provide vital connections for those rural villages. Even roads, the one lifeline to country villages, are falling deeper and deeper into disrepair, and as squeezed local authority budgets are forced to focus more and more on only the busiest roads. I recently visited Root Travis Primary School, which has less than 30 pupils in the whole school. The children had sat down and worked out one thing that they wanted to speak to me as an MP about, and that was a sign outside their school warning drivers of children crossing the road. Now, I was happy to write to the local council to champion their cause, but I can't help but feel that a school that had been in a town or city, well, they wouldn't have even had to ask. It would have just been done automatically. Such a small thing, but so symbolic of the way that rural communities have been treated as an afterthought, when they are, they are not always or even thought of at all. But if that street sign is a symbol of how things have been, I hope the steps that this government has started to take are symbolic of a new relationship with rural communities. The Rural England Prosperity Fund is one such step, helping to support local businesses to establish, grow or diversify, and supporting charities and community groups to enrich their areas. Another step is the additional funding the Rural Community Assets Fund brings, which will help preserve and improve cherished local community facilities. And finally, the Action with Communities in Rural England grant will help rural community groups and others offer social inclusion activities. I'm sure the Minister will talk about many of these and more, but I wanted to welcome them, especially the focus on empowering and developing capacity within our rural communities, working with people, giving them the tools they need to make their communities flourish. The knowledge and expertise of generations who have worked and bring great value from our local communities needs to be recognised, particularly as we start to meet the challenges that climate change brings. New blue-green engineering will be a huge and vital part of working...
Thank you, Dr. Murison. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and congratulations to the member for South Devon for an opportunity to discuss the government's plans for supporting rural communities with the Minister directly. I take this opportunity to highlight the infrastructure challenges facing my community across Farnham, Borden, Hazelmere, Liphook and its surrounding villages. These challenges have a significant impact on the daily lives of the residents and businesses in our towns, and it's crucial that the government recognises there are issues, particularly ongoing gaps in health, broadband, transport, banking, infrastructure, and I hope we can work together across this House to find sustainable solutions that will support my constituents. At the very heart of our rural villages lies the village pub. Only half an hour ago or so, Dr. Murison, I spoke in the Employment Rights Bill, another blow to the pub industry, severely impacting the hospitality sector. On my pub crawl across the constituency, publicans and landlords pleaded with me to change the government's red tape strangulation on these low-profit, high social value organisations as core parts of the community. Perhaps it's because the government can't nationalise the pub that they have no understanding of its social impact. Likewise, banking hubs are essential for my constituency. I only now have one bank and one building society for the whole of my constituency of over 100,000 people. And whilst I welcome the banking hub in Hazelmere and the one we're going to get in Whitehill and Borden, that's simply not enough for those people who need to access cash. Likewise, health infrastructure within the ex-military town of Borden in my constituency is a real problem, and despite having written to the Secretary of State on numerous occasions about this, especially around the Chase Community Hospital, lastly on the 28th of January, I still haven't had a response from that department. In terms of transport infrastructure for rural areas, I do hope that the government continues with the last government's promise to upgrade Hickley's Corner, and I make a plea to the Minister that also they will fund the Wrecklesham bypass in some years to come. Dr. Murison, I will close there, but I would be grateful for the Minister to respond to this. While investment pours into the urban areas, rural communities are left behind battling the infrastructure challenges that I've said. Does he share my frustration, and what is the government going to do about it?
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship this afternoon. I want to begin by thanking the member for South Devon for securing this debate. I am so deeply proud to have grown up in and represent a rural area. Anyone from any of the villages can tell you about how unique their communities are. From Sissett's waysailing to Shelley's fundraising French lunch and the Wombles of Triggleston who help keep their village tidy. Rural villages across my constituency provide such a rich, distinct communities. The beauty and that community can obscure deep issues in access to public services, transport and employment opportunities. Following the previous government's real-term cut of £1 billion to NHS dentistry between 2010 and 2014, everyone in the country knows the struggle to access a dentist. But in dental deserts in rural communities, these cuts are felt more deeply. Across our country, the previous government allowed our roads to fall in disrepair. But in rural communities, where you're more reliant on your car because public transport is so unreliable, you know the real cost and inconvenience of the pothole crisis. And while everyone has felt the rise of antisocial behaviour since 2010, only rural communities face the full impact of county lines, livestock theft and fly tipping. That's why I'm so supportive of the efforts the government is taking to support our rural communities. We are delivering a renewed push to expand 5G and broadband coverage by 2030, so poor connectivity stops holding rural communities back. We are providing nearly £1.6 billion in funding to finally get a grips with the pothole crisis, supporting parents taking their children to school and the people just trying to get to work. Now, when I report potholes I see across the constituency, I have the confidence they will be filled. For constituents like so many in Emily who are tired of waiting hours for the buses that are delayed, if they come at all, we are giving communities the power to take back control of their bus services with our Better Buses bill. And for all those unable to see an NHS dentist, forced to go private or live in pain, 700,000 new dental appointments will be delivered, bolstering the flexible commissioning and golden hellos needed to attract dentists in rural areas. Chair, these are real concrete commitments to rural communities across our nation. Commitments on potholes, on bus services, on dentists, tackling rural crime. From the city centre to the village hall, I am proud to support Labour government in delivering these much-needed changes to our countries and its rural communities.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend from South Devon for securing this debate. My own constituency of North Devon covers nearly 1,100 square kilometres, and that raises some unique challenges for rural services that will be familiar to many around the room. I believe the most pressing of those challenges is equal access to local health services, not just because of geography, but because of an ageing population where more than a quarter of residents are over 65. My constituents, many of whom are living in neighbouring constituencies across Devon and Cornwall, must travel some distance to the remotest acute hospital in mainland England, North Devon District Hospital. But the pattern can be seen across the UK. 97% of urban households live within 8 kilometres of an hospital, but only 55% of rural households can say the same. Astonishingly, 98% of the urban population also live within 4 kilometres of an NHS dentist, compared with just 57% of rural residents. Government figures from November suggest that there are 460 more people per dentist living in rural areas than in urban areas. Something that was highlighted to me by North Devon Council following the removal of the Rural Services Delivery Grant was that pockets of intense deprivation in the poorest rural and coastal communities can easily be lost in government statistics for wider areas. According to the government statistics on rural England published last month, Ofcom and DEFRA even use different definitions for rural and urban. When talking about the rollout of gigabit broadband, either settlements are under 2,000 or under 10,000 people respectively. By this measure, I have either 2 urban centres in my constituency or 9, depending on whose maths you use. We need a reliable picture of just how isolated some people in rural and coastal communities are and how much support they really need. So as part of this debate, to finish, please can the Minister tell us what the government is doing to ensure that publicly funded support for rural areas is being targeted effectively, especially in pockets of deprivation.
James Nash.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, Chair of the debate. Congratulate the Honourable Member for South Devon for securing this opportunity to talk about rural areas. I've led a council that covered a rural area, so this is something that I am very passionate about. I'll start by just applauding the government for the work it has started, and I think that is really important. My honourable friend has already mentioned broadband, buses, roads. We've talked about the Royal England Prosperity Fund, which has been extended, not maybe as much as the honourable member would like, but it has been extended. Banking hubs have been mentioned. Flooding is a really critical issue for our rural areas, and I welcome the government's £2.65 billion investment, which is restoring some pretty woeful and underfunded flood defences. GPs are so important to our communities, and I'm very pleased that the GP contract has been agreed and there is an opportunity now to end the 8 AM scramble, which is so important to my constituents. Pharmacies as well, I'm delighted to hear that the 2025-26 contract negotiation is underway. Pharmacies are vital to solving some of the issues that our hospitals and our wider healthcare sector is facing, and I really hope that the government will come to resolving the pressures on our community pharmacies. So there's a lot of good work that's underway. The point that I would just like to emphasise is that for me, for our government to deliver a lot of the change and the growth that we want to see, it is through our rural areas. So a mile and a half from where I live, we have the West Burton Power Station site. It is there that we will see a fusion energy plant, the first in this country, one of the best in the world to be built. It will be taking place in a rural area. National grid connections, which solar farms and other important infrastructure will connect to. It's in rural areas. Where will we see our housing growth? A lot of it will be through our rural areas. And so I wrote a letter which sympathised with the position you outlined about funding for our rural councils. I believe that our growth that we need to see over the next few years is through rural communities. And that's why I do, therefore, encourage the government to really value those communities, to engage with them and make sure that they are at the heart of our vision for the United Kingdom that we want to see.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my member from South Devon, my two main calls for government support for rural communities are as follows. Rural communities that are producing a very substantial portion of our nation's electricity should be paid 5% of revenue for all newly consented renewable energy generated both onshore and offshore as community benefit. That would be transformational for the income of rural areas. Secondly, many homes in my constituency and throughout the country are forced to heat their homes with electricity as they are not connected to mains gas. Electricity bills are 4 times the price of mains gas bills per kilowatt, 4 times the amount. The reason for this is that the environmental taxes, which make up a substantial part of our electricity bills, are levied far more heavily on electricity than they are on gas. This should be equalised. It is a really unfair punishment on people who are not mains gas living in Britain. Thank you very much.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate my colleague from South Devon both for bringing this debate and for summing up the issues so comprehensively. The one I want to talk about is transport. Successive governments have judged transport investment by the number of people using it, and rural areas obviously lose out on this criteria, but our need for transport is significant. We need cycleways and footpaths because our roads are narrow and unlit. We need regular, reliable and affordable buses, and those routes shouldn't just get us to the nearest town. We've got friends, clubs, GPs, schools and shops in neighbouring villages and shouldn't need a car to get there safely. In my constituency of Ely and East Cambridgeshire, we have villages with no buses. Other villages do have a bus, but only every 2 hours, and with the last bus at 7 p.m. and no bus on Sunday. Many of our sixth form college students have to take 2 buses and spend 2 hours travelling each way to college, 4 hours a day. Doesn't leave a lot of time and energy for study. Rural communities really are beautiful places to live, but we need government to invest in our rural communities. Otherwise, they're going to become places where only those fit enough and wealthy enough to drive can live, and that's not acceptable.
Ellen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Dr. serve with you in the chair, and can I congratulate my friend, the member for South Devon, for an excellent speech. And because she made such an excellent speech covering most of the issues that I would have liked to cover, and we have very short time, I'm going to just hone in on 3 issues. The first is public transport, as my honourable friend has also just picked up on. Shropshire has lost 63% of its bus miles since 2015, compared to a national average of 19%. It's the biggest issue for people who live in my constituency, and particularly young people who can't access part-time work or their friends, and often their further education. And yet the revenue allocation for Shropshire under the Bus Service Improvement Plan was only £2.5 million. It's a massive issue for us, and I would really urge the Minister to see if we can take another look at that. I also want to pick up on the impact of poor local authority funding on cultural opportunities for people in rural areas, with things like grassroots sports. So let's take, for example, Greenfields in Market Drayton, which is a woefully inadequate sports facility for a growing town of more than 10,000 people. The council essentially can't afford to improve those facilities. They've got great plans, they haven't got any money for them. And that's because local councils are so badly underfunded. The cutting of the Rural Services Delivery Grant cost £9 million for Shropshire. It's an area much, much bigger than Greater Manchester, with people spread evenly across the county in a space of about 1 per hectare. And the cost of delivery of services is far in excess of that in an urban area. So I must ask the Minister to look at how we value the cost of services when we fund local councils, because we are in danger of leaving them critically underfunded compared to their urban counterparts. Thank you.
Mitchell Gilmore.
Oh, thank you. It was lovely to see you last night. It's a pleasure under your chairmanship. And obviously I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for South Devon, for securing this debate of vital importance. And it's always excellent to see so many of my Liberal Democrat colleagues here to support our rural communities. As the Member of Parliament for the overwhelmingly rural constituency of Tiverton and Minehead, I'm incredibly proud to represent such a beautiful part of the world. We are, for all, our natural beauty, however, not without our problems. On Monday, I met with Sir Chris Whitty to discuss the fact that my constituency is at the very sharp end of what can only be described as a dentistry crisis, when dental practice is closing in their groves. In other words, my constituency sits in a dental desert. According to the House of Commons Library in 2024, the percentage of adults seen by a dentist in the last 2 years across Tiverton and Minehead was well below the average in England. In Somerset, it was just 32%. In Devon, it was 34.7%. The England average was 40.3%. The data is even more troubling in the case of children in my constituency. In Somerset, it was 42.3%, and in Devon, it was 46.6%. But the average across England was 54.4%. The disparity is appalling. As many of my colleagues have mentioned, young people in Tiverton and Minehead are getting a woeful deal. The gaps in sixth form provision, save the few places at West Somerset Community College and Petrock, are detrimental to the aspirations of students wishing to pursue further education. Excuse me, dreadful cold. So, without sounding as if I'm asking for the world, there is a lot to be done to improve the lives of the people in Tiverton and Minehead. I will not relent in my highlighting of these issues to ensure that Tiverton and Minehead, and of course rural communities up and down our country, are not overlooked. Thank you very much. Minister, thank you for listening.
Wendy Chamberlain.
To serve under your chairmanship, and congratulate to my honourable friend for calling this important debate. One of the things about my constituency is it's very easy to point out on a map. That's because it's on the coast, but it's also because it's big, and it's big because it's rural. We might have populations such as Leven and St Andrews, but only 4% of my constituency, Dr Morrison, is built up. It is more surprisingly rural than people think. And I just want to highlight, in the short time I have, about connections, because that is one of the critical things for rural communities. First is poor phone signal. There's problems in terms of that creates problems in terms of energy, where old-style smart meters, which most people still rely on, cannot speak to the system. How can we help people to better manage their energy if they cannot use the systems that are given for them? Poor phone signal also means reliance on landlines, and I think Storm Eowyn taught us all in recent weeks that being without power for days causes challenges as we move to digital by design. And in terms of digital by design, that's particularly unsuited for rural constituencies. I think we've all been at farmers' markets and otherwise where people are standing, sort of waving their cash card machines in order to pick up a signal. And that lack of cash and banking services is a huge issue for many constituencies. And those poor cash and banking services, for my own constituency, we have 8 bank branches. That sounds great, but 6 of them are in St Andrews. If it wasn't for the Nationwide Building Society, we would have no access to cash or face-to-face banking services in my constituency. And in terms of ATMs, they're difficult to get to, and that's because public transport is difficult to get to. Now, I understand that's devolved for me, but that does mean that we end up in a doom loop of bus services not being utilised because they're not convenient at convenient times for people to get to work or to access utilities, but then they end up being cut because people aren't using them. I think finally I would just want to say that the borough towns are really important. Cooper is my borough town, but it's a spoke, it's at the centre of the wheel, and that is how communities come together, and we need to ensure that we support those areas so that we can actually deliver the services that people need. Rural Britain is different from urban areas, and we need to remember that. Thank you.
Cameron Torres.
Thank you, Dr. Newson. It's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I thank my honourable friend for South Devon for securing this debate. Tewkesbury constituency is home to the fastest growing borough outside London, but almost half of my constituents are within the worst 30% of broadband connectivity in the UK. Mobile reception in Bishop's Cleeve is embarrassing for one of the largest parishes in my constituency. But these are not the only symptoms of a constituency which has been haphazardly developed with housing, but without any of the necessary infrastructure to support it. My residents resort to travelling by private vehicles because the public transport infrastructure simply isn't there. Some of my villagers walk for miles along dangerous roads, sometimes without pathways to reach a bus stop, miss a bus or suffer a cancellation, and they might be waiting for several hours. I've called previously for investment in on-demand bus services such as the Gloucestershire Robin. Later this year, the Cotswold Designer Outlet will open just off the M5 on the A46 in Ashchurch. There has been absolutely no road or rail infrastructure to accommodate this development, which is likely to draw hundreds of thousands of very welcome shoppers every year to our beautiful constituency, if they can even get here. Ashchurch railway station suffers more delays than 90% of stations nationwide. The A46 is already plagued by traffic gridlock on a daily basis because thousands of new homes have been deployed there by developers with the resources to overpower local authorities. These issues can be alleviated if the DfT accepts and supports Gloucestershire County Council's proposals for a new junction 9 Alpha from the M5, which will relieve some of the burden from the A46. Our very modest Ashchurch station, which also serves Tewkesbury, badly needs investment to accommodate the coming influx of visitors to the constituency. Thank you.
Ross Savage, very briefly.
Thank you, Dr Morrison. It is a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for South Devon, for bringing this debate. Today, I will focus on my constituency of the South Cotswolds, an area rich in heritage and beauty, but facing distinct challenges, for example, public transport and access to NHS services. The cancellation of the 84-85 bus route last year severed connections from Hillesley and Alderley to Yate. I know of a young man who was raised by his grandparents who couldn't afford to run him around the place, so he absolutely relied on the bus to get to college. That college course offered him a real opportunity to train him for a job with decent prospects and to escape the cycle of poverty. When the bus route was cancelled, he couldn't get to college and had to drop out of his course. Second, an older lady who used to use the bus into Yate to do weekly shopping. When the bus route went and she couldn't get into Yate, she lost her freedom and independence. She became isolated and lonely, and the health consequences of that are well documented. These examples demonstrate the false economy of cutting public transport, which only leads to greater reliance on the state and fewer opportunities for individuals. Moving on to the NHS, access to dental services in particular is a serious problem. I know of a lady in Tetbury who had severe toothache and had to rely on Bonjela until she was able to arrange for transport for treatment. Meanwhile, I'm engaged in an ongoing battle with the local ICB to ensure continuity of private care provision in Shurston. The ICB has admitted that their toolkit, the algorithm that they use to decide the distribution of resources for primary care, was designed for an urban context not a rural one. Coupled with the lack of public transport, see above, this is causing real problems.
Spokesperson Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Dr Morrison. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I would also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for South Devon, for bringing forward this very important debate and for her excellent speech. Rural communities and farming go hand in hand. They are the backbone of our rural economy. Glastonbury and Somerton is home to over 800 farms, with a quarter of England's agricultural holdings and a fifth of England's total farmed area in the southwest. Agriculture employs over 60,000 people in the region, with many more indirectly affected by the industry. However, Dr Morrison, since the budget, the only topic on farmers' minds is the lack of support from the government. They tell me that they didn't think their plight could get any worse after the last Conservative government, because that government just didn't care, but it has. This Labour government doesn't seem to even want to understand the agricultural industry. Yesterday's with no notice announcement to halt the SFI schemes has sent shockwaves around farming circles. It beggars belief that the largest farming trade body, the NFU, had only 30 minutes notice of that announcement. The absence of the warning and communication will only go to further alarm farmers across the country who are feeling anxious, left behind and forgotten about. This sudden closure of an important scheme has left thousands of farmers cut off from funding, and I worry about the impact that this will have on nature-friendly farming. The scheme is vital to incentivise farmers to carry out their work for the public good, such as managing floodwater and storing slurry safely. This is of extreme importance in Somerset, given the high threat of flooding. A beef farmer from Wick, near Langport, recently told me that he has no confidence in the Environment Agency to protect his land and others from flooding, that they are too slow to pump water off fields, increasing larger flood risks when it next rains. The closure of the SFI will now only make it more difficult for farmers to put in place measures to manage floods. The scheme had over 37,000 multi-year live agreements, which was under the highest demand since it began. And the government have not announced any plans yet to replace it. This announcement comes at a time when farmers are already losing the vast majority of basic payments this year, and they should rightly be rewarded for good environmental work. Given SFI, given SFI has now reached its completion, will the department now publish key performance indicators for SFI and how they were met? Or will they keep farmers in the dark again? So, Dr Morrison, the Liberal Democrats are deeply disappointed by Labour's decisions to compound the damage done to our farmers by the Conservatives, who left the farming budget with an underspend of hundreds of millions. Yet again, it will be the smaller farmers who are hardest hit, especially hill farmers and those earning significantly less than the minimum wage. The Liberal Democrats want to see an urgent reverse of the changes made from the Chancellor and, in addition, a £1 billion a year in support for farmers in addition. And clarity from the government about the impact of cutting this scheme on farmers' incomes, the restoration of nature, the production of food and on rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr Morrison, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I thank the Honourable Member for South Devon for securing this really important debate, because supporting rural communities has been a persistent challenge across government. The very siloed nature of government departments and the false assumption that DEFRA has sole responsibility for rural affairs has created sometimes delay and confusion in delivering a truly cross-government support for our rural communities and the support that they need, which is why when we were in administration, the Conservatives recognised this issue and we took specific steps to try and rural-proof policy from other government departments, as well as lock in unique funding streams to tackle those uniquely rural challenges. Take the £3 million Rural Innovation Fund, for example, which specifically sought to find new answers to problems specific to rural communities, like connectivity, social isolation, and improving productivity in our highly and hugely important rural community. But there is, of course, much more to be done, like banking hubs, post office services, and the challenges mentioned by my honourable friend for Farnham and Borden, when you are left with one banking service branch that is open, and yet you still can't get that banking hub in provision. And I would urge the Minister to ask the colleagues in the Treasury Department not to wait for that last bank branch to remain open before banking hubs can be applied for. The challenges with higher prices in our rural areas, coupled with lower income streams, has also been mentioned in this debate, and the increased overheads associated for businesses and local service provision to operate, whether it is GPs, dentists, and those challenges have, of course, Dr Murison, been exacerbated by the Employers' National Insurance that is impacting most of those businesses. But I can't go any further, Dr Murison, without mentioning our farming community, who are, without doubt, the backbone of our rural communities. In many cases, family farming businesses are the core of our rural life and have been for decades, if not centuries. But now we know the damage that Labour's budget has caused and the upset in the challenges that it has created. I didn't think that it could get any worse, but then we have seen the cruelest betrayal yet. Not my words, Dr Murison, but the words of the President of the CLA in last night's decision to stop the SFI grants. These grants were promised to our farmers after Labour slashed the de-linked payment rates that is directly impacting many of our farming communities' cash flows right now in this financial year. And I thought that these grants had cross-party support from the House, but not, as it seems, Dr Murison, on the basis of last night's announcement. And yet, even though we had the statement, there are many questions that still remain unanswered by the Farming Minister. So I hope the Farming Minister will be able to answer questions such as, where is the actual breakdown in the budget, in the farming budget, to those farmers that were benefiting from the SFI applications? And where has that BPS money that was allocated for the de-linked payments gone? And when can our farmers expect to see the SFI applications open? And does the Minister realise the absolute challenge and distress that this has caused to many of those that had processed their applications, almost got them ready to go, to hit the submit button, but yet now are sitting in limbo and now unsure as to whether it will be 6 months or even a year before any confirmation is given. Dr Murison, this debate has also focused on many, many other issues across the challenges within our rural communities, whether it be connectivity, transport, health, housing, community cohesion, building, and businesses, public services. These are all issues that are made much more complex and nuanced by the practical challenges of delivering them in a rural community. And what I hope this government understands is that this policy may work in, that policy that comes out from other government departments may work within our city centre environments, but they don't often work in the countryside. And funding streams like the Rural Service Delivery Grant, which was worth £110 million, recognised specifically the challenges that local rural councils faced. But yet, this Labour government decided to stop that funding stream, and we have had no indication whatsoever on what or when it will be replaced. Cutting vital grants, such as the Rural Service Delivery Grant, does not install any faith amongst our local authorities on the level of confidence that this government has in recognising those challenges within our rural communities. The assault on our farmers has already shaken up the faith of millions of people living in our rural communities, and quite rightly they fear that, like farmers, our rural communities fear that Labour doesn't understand them and doesn't care to understand them. So, Dr Murison, I ask the Minister that I hope that he will take on board many of the points that have been made by many honourable members in this debate to do with the challenges about rural communities.
Minister.
Thank you, Dr Murison. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the Honourable Lady for bringing this debate. I think the number of speakers has shown how much interest there is, and there are many, many points that have been covered. Too many to cover in a short time. I'll do my best. I would also say that both the front bench spokespeople obviously raised the issue of the SFI, which I addressed in a statement earlier today. I thought the Shadow Minister was starting so well, actually, when he talked about the challenge that faces any government in terms of the cross-departmental nature of these issues. We are honoured to have a former Secretary of State with us who will know full well how difficult it is from DEFRA to drive these rural issues. I made a particular pitch to be the rural minister within our team in the Commons, which has been different from before, and I'm absolutely determined the rural issues get a fair hearing. Let me, of course I will.
Thank you for giving way, and also just to put on record my apologies, Mr Morrison. I was giving evidence to the COVID public inquiry, which I hope colleagues will realise was a reason for my late arrival. Just a very quick question to the Farming Minister. Could he clarify when he was first told of the government's decision to close SFI for new applications?
We made a decision last night based on many, many months of following the budgets, but as I explained earlier today, it is the logic of the change of the system that if you have a fixed amount of budget, I'm afraid there comes a point when it is full. Now, because many members have raised many other issues, and we do have a 3-hour backbench business debate on farming in the Chamber tomorrow, I shall turn to other issues. And I particularly wanted to thank the Honourable Lady for bringing this. I had an opportunity to visit her lovely constituency very early in my tenure as Minister, and I thought she gave a very good account, as did many other members, of the broad range of challenges that are faced in rural areas. I'm very committed to the rural brief, and I've done a number of visits in my first few months, which has allowed me to see the importance, particularly of how we can apply the government's missions in rural areas, particularly around growing the economy, developing clean energy, tackling crime. I went to Northumberland to see the excellent work of the National Rural Crime Unit, spoke to a number of farmers who sadly have had expensive equipment stolen, spoke to volunteer crime watch groups, been to Warwickshire recently to see the positive effect that you can achieve through community shops and through community initiatives such as building on the village, making sure that the community facilities are in place such as village halls, and I think I'll be doing many more visits around the country and seeing many more of those. Now, back in July, I'm happy to give way, although I'm going to run out of time.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, as well. Just on that point there about rural crime, obviously it's an issue that's come up a bit less today in the debate, so I wanted to make sure we had some moments to reflect on that as well as you have started to do there. Would you also agree with me that the government's approach to a cross-governmental rural crime strategy, being the first of its kind, is the type of approach that will actually tackle these issues in meaningful ways and long-lasting ways for rural communities?
My wonderful friend, she's absolutely right. I think it's long overdue, and I've had detailed conversations already with colleagues in the Home Office about how we can take this forward, and there'll be further announcements in due course. So we have been looking at a range of issues which are of importance to rural areas, but we do recognise there are very specific challenges, and a number of them have been touched upon. We also know that direct support through funding programmes is important, which is why last week we announced that up to £33 million will be directed to the Rural England Prosperity Fund, used to help businesses in rural areas to expand, creating jobs, kick-starting the rural economy, as well as helping to improve local infrastructure and essential services. And a further £5 million, I will.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. In my constituency of Bristol and Woodstock, many of my constituents suffer some of the worst mobile coverage and broadband coverage in the country. And it's a particular concern to vulnerable households who are no longer able to access copper-wired telephony and are forced to rely only on internet protocols. Can the Minister say what the government is doing to make sure that these vulnerable households still have access to phones in an emergency?
He's absolutely right to raise it. It's an important point. I'll be coming to it in a moment in my speech. I was just talking about the £5 million funding for capital grants for the refurbishment and development of community-owned assets such as village halls and community centres. That will also support rural housing enablers who are very important to bring forward sites to provide affordable housing, and we're providing further funding for actions with communities in rural England, ACRE, to provide advice and support and to rural community and voluntary groups such as the ones that I mentioned I visited recently. Now, I recognise the descriptions from a number of colleagues about the need to travel further to access work, education and training, and we fully appreciate this can make it much more costly and time-consuming, leading to the frustrations that have been described. And I listened closely to my near neighbour from Ely and East Cams about local bus services. She will know that with the Mayor of the Combined Authority in Cambridgeshire have used powers to move to franchising for bus services, and we've set out wider plans for the future in our bus services bills, which will give local leaders the tools they need to to ensure bus services reflect the needs of the communities that they serve. Now, the digital issue, which the honourable gentleman has just raised, absolutely central to our view of the future, was also highlighted by my honourable friend from Aldsett and Derby Dale. Now, through the shared rural network, which has helped to deliver 4G mobile coverage to 95% of the UK a year ahead of target, we're continuing to deliver 4G connectivity to places where there is the kind of limited coverage that's been described. But we know there are still parts that lag behind, and we're going to work with the industry to deliver improved coverage to these communities via the shared rural network.
Thank you for allowing me to intervene. Minister, I wonder if you could persuade the Chancellor to leave her constituency of Leeds West and explore the reaches of rural Britain, because it strikes me a lot of these issues are due to funding and the fact that rural Britain is substantially underfunded compared to urban Britain. Thank you.
It's a very long-running discussion and debate that goes back over decades, and I will do all I can to persuade the Chancellor of the needs of rural Britain. Project Gigabit continues to be rolled out. It's delivering gigabit-capable broadband to many UK premises, many situated in rural communities that are not in the commercial rollout plans. Now, touched on housing, access to genuinely affordable homes, essential, absolutely essential. The current housing shortage is driving up rents, leaving some of the most vulnerable without access to a safe and secure home. So we're reforming planning policy. This, again, is a complicated problem, which I'm not going to try and cover in 1 minute. But last year, the government ran a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. The response to this consultation reflected on the higher costs of housing delivery in rural areas and the fact we want to see more affordable housing in these areas as part of our ambition to deliver the biggest increase in social and affordable house building in a generation. And we'll consider how policy can better promote rural affordable housing and wider exception site policies as part of the work to produce those policies later in 2025. Energy costs were touched on, huge challenge for rural areas, and I'm very aware that fuel poverty rates are higher in rural communities and that many homes are off the gas grid and more susceptible to fuel price fluctuations. The Honourable Lady in opening asked about the Index of Rural Deprivation report. I'm told that will be available later in this year, so that will be published. I'm afraid I'm not going to, because I'm very conscious I'm going to run out of time. We will need to look at skills and opportunities in rural areas. I was very struck by the point made by my friend from Doncaster East and the Isle of Arkham about the school issue, and it's all too typical, I'm afraid, of my experience of how rural communities often feel they are left out. We're planning to expand our childcare and early years system, drive up standards, modernise the school curriculum. We'll also boost rural and agricultural skills by reforming the apprenticeships levy into a growth and skills levy. And we'll also be opening new specialist technical excellence colleges to give rural people the chance to develop the skills that they need to empower rural businesses to play a bigger role in the skills revolution. Health services, again, hugely important issue, and I very much agree with the points made by my honourable friend from Rushcliffe about the 8 a.m. scramble. Absolutely right. Just as important in rural areas as anywhere else. The dentistry issue, again, very well made and is being addressed, but much more will need to be done. Sadly, well, not sadly, but we know that demographics show that as people age, many people move to cities, out of cities to coastal and rural areas, will need more care, so increasingly living in places where it is more difficult to provide care, and that needs to be reflected in the way we approach these issues. Integrated care systems will have a role in designing services that meets the needs of local people. I heard the point about the algorithm, and I'll go away and have a look at that. But most important, we need to work with clinicians and local communities to make sure that we get those systems right. Finally, on local government, again, huge issue which can't be covered in 1 minute, I'm afraid, but we're making available significant new funding, including 1.3 billion of new funding within the local government financial settlement for 2025-26, including £600 million to support the most deprived areas, including in shire districts, through the new recovery grant. Alongside that, our commitment will be judged against a guarantee that no local authority will see a reduction in their core spending power in 25-26 after taking account of any increase in council tax levels. And that will provide protections for all authorities, including district councils, to sustain their services between years. So, Dr Murison, in conclusion, I am absolutely determined to drive forward the rural agenda across government. The debate today actually gives me some confidence that there's support across the House in this endeavour. I'm absolutely determined that rural areas will play a key role in delivering the national missions the government has set out, but also not only delivering them, will share in the benefits of those national missions will bring.
Very briefly.
Thank you, Dr Murison, and it has been a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I'm not going to name all the speakers who contributed, but unsurprisingly, health, transport, phones, broadband and farming have all come up in the debate, and the pubs of Farnham and Borden, which we mustn't forget. I'd just like to close by urging the government to...
Adjourned. Order.